Perhaps when you eat or even do something as simple as breathing, you take these things for granted. But for people with cleft lips and cleft palates, these sort of things don't come as easy. 1 in 750 people in Philippines as of 2025 have cleft lip as a congenital disorder. But what exactly is it? It is the incomplete formation or fusion of your lip, mouth, or even palate. This results in your soft palate, hard palate, gums, or even lips to not fuse properly.
But first, in order to understand the disorder of cleft lip or cleft palate and how it affects the development of the face of an individual, let us first understand how the face normally develops. You know, as they say in scientific experiments, you need the control group in order to compare your experimental results to in order to make sense of them, right? So let's make sense of this by comparing it with the normal. Okay, here we go. So when you're observing an embryo, you first have to understand that what you see eventually becomes something else. You know, your body comes from an embryo before you were born. And likewise, your body parts come from something in that embryo. Like your face, it comes from something. And that something where your face comes from is called the neural crest cells. These are cells that are able to migrate and move around the body because normal cells, they're typically stuck to where they are located. Right? 3 weeks after your father's sperm fertilizes your mother's egg to form the zygote, these neural crest cells will be finished migrating and settle in their respective destinations. And one of these destinations is the area where your face will be formed. Now, craniofacial, or simply facial development, starts at the 4th week and lasts up to the 12th week. This period of facial development that is important for our discussion is split into two parts. First is forming your external facial structures, and next is forming your palate. The first part is spanning the 4th week to the 6th week, and the second part is spanning from the 6th week to the 12th week. The entire process is driven by various factors like gene expression, various hormones, and cell signaling pathways that influence cranial neural crest migration into the fated places to form the shape of the face. I mean, how would the neural crest cells know where to migrate anyway, right? So anyway, how the external structures of the face is formed starts with the appearance of the oropharyngeal membrane at the side where your face will be formed. This will then break down into your oral cavity, or your mouth. There are two sources where external structures are derived from, and all of these are what we call the five prominences. First, your frontonasal prominence, which comes from the proliferation or multiplication of mesenchymal cells, basically another type of migrating cells. Ventral 2, or below the front of the brain. And the other four, okay, they are the paired maxillary, upper jaw, and mandibular, lower jaw prominences, which both come from parts of the first pharyngeal arch. Now, we're not going to really go into deep about what the pharynx is, but just know that it's a very important structure in the embryo. All right. Now, there is a space between the upper jaw and the lower jaw called the stomodeum, which eventually becomes the mouth. The maxillary prominences expand medially, or basically they stretch toward the middle, causing the nasal prominences to be pushed medially alongside them. And once that happens, they fuse, and then fuse some more in the midline to make the two pairs continuous. The lateral parts of the upper lip will form then as a result of this fusion, and cleft lip generally occurs when this doesn't happen properly. Now for the palate. This structure is basically what separates the oral cavity from your nasal cavity. In other words, before the existence of the palate, the inside of your mouth and the inside of your nose were once one big space inside your head. The formation of the palate involves the formation of the primary and then the secondary palate. The primary palate comes from something called the intermaxillary segment, which is basically the result of the fusion of the medial nasal prominences with their contralateral counterparts once the nose is formed. Now, to form the secondary palate, first, the maxillary prominences expand further medially and form the palatal shelves. These palatal shelves will continue to go toward the middle once again, and they fuse above the tongue. As the mandible, or your lower jaw, continues to develop, your mouth expands. And as the mouth expands, the tongue drops to separate them from the palatal shelves. Okay, and once that happens, they fuse with each other, the palatal shelves. Okay, horizontally, they fuse with each other. Vertically, they fuse with the nasal septum. And this resulting structure would be your secondary palate. Okay, any of these steps, okay, in any of these steps, if they don't happen properly, you will have cleft palate.
So, as discussed, the baby's face is formed from several small pieces of tissue. There's one central piece called the frontonasal prominence, two upper jaw pieces known as the maxillary prominences, and other segments that will eventually form the nose and mouth. The upper lip forms when the maxillary segments from the sides meet and join with the central nasal segment. If this fusion doesn't happen completely, a gap appears in the upper lip, leading to a cleft lip. This can occur on one side, which we call a unilateral cleft lip, or on both sides, which is a bilateral cleft lip. The opening can also be small, or it can extend all the way up to the nostril. Meanwhile, a cleft palate happens when the tissues that form the palate, or the top part of the mouth, do not fuse together fully. This leaves an opening or split that separates the two sides, the severity of which can vary. Some babies have only a small gap, while others have a more extensive opening, depending on how much tissue did not develop or fuse. Although the exact cause of cleft lip and palate remains unknown, several factors can increase the risk. These include family history, poor maternal nutrition, use of unprescribed medications during pregnancy, very early or late maternal age, and inadequate prenatal care. However, it is important to emphasize that in most cases, there is no single clear cause and that it is not the parent's fault. These conditions arise very early in development due to a combination of genetic and environmental influences. As for the signs and symptoms of a cleft lip and cleft palate, a cleft lip is usually very noticeable right after birth as a separation or opening in the upper lip. The nose may also look slightly flattened or asymmetrical on the side of the cleft because the lip and nose structures develop together. Meanwhile, a cleft palate can be a little harder to detect visually because the opening is inside the mouth. Babies with a cleft palate often show feeding problems right away, such as milk leaking through the nose because the mouth and nose are not fully separated. They may also have trouble sucking, which can also lead to slower weight gain. As the child grows, other symptoms become more noticeable. Because a palate plays an important role in speech, children with an unrepaired cleft palate may develop hypernasal speech, where too much air escapes through the nose. They are also more prone to frequent ear infections because the cleft affects the muscles that help open the eustachian tube, which is a narrow passageway connecting your middle ear to the back of your throat. Over time, this can even lead to hearing issues. Aside from these, dental problems are also common, such as missing, extra, or misaligned teeth, especially if the cleft extends through the gum line. Overall, the signs and symptoms of cleft lip and palate affect feeding, speech, hearing, and dental development, all of which will be further discussed by Christy.
When the palate does not develop normally, it creates a ripple effect throughout the child's overall development, or ontogeny. A cleft lip and palate affect feeding, hearing, tooth formation, and speech, which are long-term functional challenges as the child grows. First, since there is an opening in the palate, food and liquids can move from the mouth up into the nose. Babies also cannot create enough suction to latch effectively during breastfeeding. This makes it easy for them to become dehydrated or malnourished if not managed early. Second, children with cleft palates are more prone to ear problems. The opening affects the normal function of the tube that drains fluid from the middle ear. As a result, fluid builds up more easily, increasing the risk of repeated ear infections. Over time, this can even lead to hearing loss if untreated. Third, dental development is affected. If the cleft reaches the upper gums, the teeth in that area may not form normally. They may erupt in the wrong position or fail to develop entirely, making the child more vulnerable to tooth decay. Finally, speech development is also impacted. The palate helps direct air through the mouth when we speak, and since the cleft is used to form sounds, their voice may come out as unclear or nasal sounding.
With all things considered, cleft lip and cleft palate remains a common disorder in the Philippines. Thus, knowledge is vital and also a path to treatment. Knowing your signs and symptoms can help you diagnose your child if they have cleft lip and palate. With that, we'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation.